Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting. We'll give everyone just a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting. The time is now 5:32 p.m. Eastern, and we'll start the virtual public scoping meeting for the environmental review of the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Commercial Construction and Operations Plan for Commercial Lease OCS-A-0508, offshore North Carolina. Thank you, everyone, for participating. My name's Pam Chanel, and I'll serve as the facilitator for today's meeting. I'm with ICF, the independent third-party contractor supporting the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. I do want to note that today's meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be part of this recorded meeting, please disconnect from this call. And the recording of this meeting will be posted on the project website. So let's go ahead and review the agenda for today's meeting. We'll begin with a series of opening remarks and presentations, which should take about an hour. First, Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy for BOEM, will provide a few opening remarks. Next, I'm sure a lot of us have become familiar with Zoom over the last year or so, but we'll review a few tips for the Zoom platform, and I'll point out some of the key features that we'll be using today. We'll then move into a few presentations. The first presentation is a brief background and history on the offshore energy leasing process given by Will Wasks of BOEM. Following Will, Bryan, the BOEM NEPA team lead for this project, will provide an overview of the environmental review process. Finally, Bryan Benito with Avangrid will provide an overview of the proposed project. At that point, we'll take a quick break to let folks stretch before we reconvene to take formal public comments. Following those formal public comments, we'll take another quick break and conclude with a question and answer session. We have a full agenda for today, so let's get started. And again, thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy for BOEM, for some introductory remarks. Michelle?
Thank you, Pam, and good evening, everyone. As Pam said, my name is Michelle Morin, and I am the Chief of the Environment Branch for Renewable Energy in the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or as we like to say, BOEM. And I want to welcome you to the first of 3 virtual public meetings for BOEM's review of the proposed Kitty Hawk offshore wind project. I wish we could meet in person, but we have found this format and Zoom to be an effective alternative to in-person meetings. And over the past year and a half, we've held over 24 virtual meetings using this format. For those of you who aren't familiar with BOEM, we are a bureau within the Department of the Interior, and we oversee the development of our energy and mineral resources on almost 2.5 billion acres of the nation's outer continental shelf, or OCS. And it's our job to ensure that development is done in an environmentally and economically responsible way. And this is supported by a robust environmental program, which ensures that we develop and use the best available science and information in our decision-making process. And public input is really essential in this project, this process, and in our renewable energy program. And your feedback plays a vital role in our environmental analysis and ensures that the best informed decisions are made regarding this and other proposed projects. So thank you everyone for joining us to learn more about the environmental review process and the proposed project. About 60 individuals pre-registered to attend today's meeting, so that's a good turnout. There's over a dozen members of BOEM participating in this evening's meeting, and we're all looking forward to hearing your comments and answering any questions you may have. And I will turn it back over to you, Pam, to keep the meeting moving.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. So I want to take a minute or two to review the features that we're going to be using during our Zoom meeting today. At any time during the meeting, if you need assistance with the Zoom platform, you can use the chat feature that's located at the bottom of your screen to message the meeting host, or you can send an email to kittyhawk@icf.com. That's KITTYHAWK@ICF.com. And we'll drop that into the chat for you. So we appreciate you participating in this virtual public scoping meeting. We would much rather be with you in person, but with the current conditions, we want to provide all the information we can while protecting everyone's health. So we'll work to conduct this meeting in a manner that closely resembles an in-person meeting. I'd ask that you please make note of the phone number for this meeting. The phone number is 1-888-788-0099. The meeting ID is 820-5880-9711. And the password is 750-46336. If you experience difficulty with your internet connection at any point during the meeting, you can call this number to listen into the meeting. Additionally, individual internet connections and bandwidths can vary and may impact your viewing experience. So we recommend closing all apps and programs and limiting other streaming or downloads while you're participating in the meeting today. And finally, we're running this meeting using Zoom Webinar, which mutes all participants and restricts video feeds. So when we get to the public comment portion of today's meeting, the meeting host will unmute you so that you can make your statement. For any media representatives that joined the meeting today, please contact Bev Winston, the Public Information Officer, at beverly.winston@boem.gov. That's BEVERLY.winston@BOEM.gov. So I want to review a couple of ground rules for today's online public scoping meeting. As previously stated, we'll provide several presentations before accepting the formal comments, and then BOEM will answer any clarifying questions that are raised during the meeting. So when we get to the formal comment period during today's call, I'll call on people who requested to make a comment when they registered. All names will be called in the order in which we received your registration. And then after all those folks have commented, I'll ask if anyone else would like to make a comment. You would then use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom platform. Or if you're calling in by phone, you'll press *9. And then I'll call on people to comment in the order in which they raise their hand. During the comment period, I'll post the names of the next 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn's coming. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on your screen, or for those of you on the phone, you'll hear a prompt that will allow you to unmute yourself to make a comment. Throughout today's meeting, if you think of a question that you'd like to have clarified, please type your question into the question and answer or the Q&A box on the Zoom platform. When we get to the question and answer portion of today's meeting, BOEM staff will answer your clarifying questions. Please note that when we receive your question and the team begins to work on an answer, we'll move your question in that Q&A box to what's called the dismiss category. And then once the answer is ready, we'll read your question and provide your answer aloud. And we'll review all of this again before the comment period and before the question and answer session. Please do keep in mind that this meeting's being recorded and transcribed, and I'd ask that there be no inappropriate language. We do have a number of participants on the call who previously registered to speak, so we're asking everyone to please keep their comments to no more than 5 minutes. Scoping comments can also be submitted through regulations.gov, and all comments, whether received orally or in writing, are weighed equally. We appreciate the opportunity to share these project updates and the environmental process with you all. We wish that we could be together in person, but we're glad to be able to come together virtually. And again, the purpose of this virtual public scoping meeting is to share information about the project and to receive your public scoping comments. We're now going to start with the presentations for today's meeting. Our first presenter is Will Vasquez of BOEM. Will?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Will Waskis. I am Bones Project Coordinator for the Kitty Hawk Wind Project that's located off of North Carolina and Virginia. So today I thought I would cover a little bit of an overview of kind of the lease area and leasing process that led to where we are today. And hopefully you'll find that useful as you're working on comments during the scoping comment period. Next slide. So the slide you're seeing now depicts essentially the BOEM renewable energy authorization process, if you will. So there's 4 kind of major stages within that process. There's a planning and analysis process or stage, a leasing stage, a site assessment stage, and then a construction operations stage, which is where we are at this point in time with the Kitty Hawk Wind project. Next slide. So what we're going to focus on, back one more. So what we're going to focus on today is what is in this red box, and that is that planning, analysis, and leasing stages. So that'll be the real meat of what we get at today. Next slide. So if we zoom in on that red box, there are several kind of important notable items that you'll want to see. So we start our process with either a request for interest or call for information and nominations. In the case of Kitty Hawk, it was a call for information and nominations. That's a notice that goes out looking for interest from developers, as well as information on the area that we're thinking about moving forward with for leasing. There's a comment period associated with that. We take that information and go through what's called this area identification process, which is essentially kind of a narrowing down, trying to address issues that came in response to the call for information, as well as taking into account the nominations that we received from developers. That ultimately leads into an area that is delineated for potential leasing, for which we do an environmental assessment on. So, and that really kind of covers the activities of lease issuance, site characterization, and site assessment. Once that's completed, we move forward with the leasing process at its heart with a proposed sale notice, which is essentially kind of a draft contract, if you will, that describes to a potential bidder what they're bidding on, as well as how that bidding process will work. There's a comment period associated with that, and then a final sale notice that finalizes all those details for an auction that is ultimately held. Next slide. So throughout that process, which isn't really highlighted kind of in that phase, is starts really with what we call BOEM intergovernmental task forces. So in the case of North Carolina, the state requested BOEM to form a task force to begin to look at potential areas for renewable energy leasing. So, and we use that task force throughout all phases of the process, but really is used for information sharing to help inform our decision-making about what we want to move forward with. So the first step with that task force was trying to develop that area to include in the call for information and nominations. So there's a couple kind of pillars of that process. One is the members of that task force, which are essentially elected state, local, and tribal representatives, officials or their designated representatives. We also lean on stakeholder input outside of the task force. We try to pull from the available data sets that are available for offshore. Obviously, we want to take lessons learned from when we've gone through this process of other states, which we had in this case, and really trying to pull all that information together. So what you can see on the right-hand side is really a culmination of whether it was studies conducted by the state of North Carolina, the various academic institutions within the state, BOEM studies, available data. You can really see kind of the whole host of issues that we kind of had to deal with, whether it was avian, marine mammals, substation locations for interconnection, distance from shore, water depths, geology. So a real whole host of things that we really had to take into account in trying to identify a call area. Next slide. So ultimately, that task force put forward 3 areas into a call for information and nominations that was published in 2012. You'll see what encompasses the Kitty Hawk area up there in the north in green, and 2 other areas that we ultimately did not move forward with down south, known as Wilmington East and Wilmington West. Next slide. So again, the point of that call for information is, 1, do we have anyone who is interested in those areas? And what you can see in the Kitty Hawk call area, that larger area, it's a mix of green and purple, was you can see we got a mix of that area that was either nominated by either 4 developers or by 5 developers. You can see the, in the case of that one separation was really, I think, developer really responding to concerns that they had heard during the task force deliberations about visual impacts. Thus, it's further away from shore, as well as some near shore vessel traffic. And you can see on the right side kind of the logos of the companies that submitted those nominations. Next slide. And again, the other point of the call for information is to identify multiple use and environmental issues. What you're seeing here is kind of a grouping of what those major issues were, really centered on visual impacts, vessel traffic, new information that had become available, as well as environmental information, really, in this case, focused on right whales. And again, in this case, the call was really focused on all 3 of the areas that I showed you. So not every issue was applicable to the Kitty Hawk wind energy area. Next slide. So I really just wanted to take a few minutes to at least speak to the major issues that we had to deal with in terms of moving from a call area to a wind energy area, or that area identification process. So the biggest one was really vessel traffic. So we really took a hard look at that. What you can see here is kind of different ways that we looked at that issue. So we did this through cooperation with not only stakeholders that use that area, whether it was American Waterways operators, the Port of Virginia, the Virginia Maritime Association, the Coast Guard, pulling together their knowledge base along with the empirical data that we had for the area. So what you can see here is some analyses that we did to try to address that. One, you can see in the center is a density analysis. The brighter that colors, the higher the density of vessels within those areas. You can see from that middle, there's a little bit of kind of an odd separation, kind of little hole donut, if you will, of little activity that had us looking at directional analysis to see if that was a directional issue or what was causing that. It really turned out just to be some old Navy platforms that are out there. And as well as we did some proximity analysis to see how close are vessels getting to each other, what kind of distances do they stay away from one another. Next slide. So the other really big one that we faced were visual concerns. So one of the efforts we undertook to address that was we did a very large visualization study. We did it in cooperation with the state of North Carolina and the Park Service, since you do have 2 major national seashores along the coast. We looked at 18 different locations, 4 different lighting conditions. We chose 3 distances, 10, 15, and 20 miles from shore. We looked at 2 different turbine models, a 3.6, which was currently being used at that time, and one that was considered more futuresque, if you will, an 8 megawatt machine, which is now, both of these would be outdated compared to what is used or being projected to be used present day. So we took the results of those visualizations. We did a series of open houses. We did them in Kitty Hawk, Wilmington, Carolina Shores, and Southport, as well as posted the results of this on the BOEM website. Next slide. So really kind of showing how we went in terms of moving from that call area through the area identification process to form a wind energy area. Really taking into account those 2 drivers. What you can see on the left side of the screen is really a couple options that we were looking at at the time. That one was trying to address those viewshed concerns, trying to keep us a good distance away from shore, but also well away from particular Park Service assets of interest, in this case, the Body Island Lighthouse, trying to keep it out of the horizon view a Siemens machine, and then was vessel traffic. So luckily, again, working with the Coast Guard and the Maritime Association and other organizations, we came up with 2 options that might work. You can kind of see those 2 larger areas on the left. One's a little more near shore, one's a little further shore. Ultimately, we picked it up the one that was furthest from shore. So you can see on the right side, that is the orange color is the wind energy area that we designated. And kind of the outline that you see was that original call area. So you can see, again, not the sole drivers, but really keeping that visual setback from the shoreline, particularly the body of the lighthouse, and trying to address those navigational concerns really were drivers in terms of delineating that wind energy area. Next slide. So now that we had that wind energy area, we did our environmental assessment to support a lease issuance. The next step in those processes was a proposed sale notice that went out in August of 2016. That was followed by a final sale notice in January of 2017. And the auction was held in March of 2017. So it went for 17 rounds. There were 4 bidders. The winning bid was just over $9 million. You can see on the right side, kind of, these are the later rounds. So you can see kind of how all 4 bidders were in it at around 12, and then slowly started to drop out until we got to round 17, with Avangrid being the winner of that lease sale. Next slide. So that brings us to kind of present day. We have received a construction operations plan. Avangrid has recently assigned the entire lease area over to a subsidiary, being Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind. That COP came to us in December of 2020. It's currently available for the public to look at, so I definitely encourage everyone to read through that at the link you're seeing there. We'll have, you'll hear about later, a lengthy review, not only our technical reviews, but an environmental review that will ultimately lead to either BOEM approving that COP, disapproving that COP, or approving that COP with conditions. But again, none of that will happen until we finish the environmental review process and a record of decision is issued. Next slide. And that is all I have.
Great, thank you so much, Will. Our next presenter is Bryan Crever with BOEM. Bryan?
Thanks, Pam, and thanks, Will. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bryan Crever, and I am the NEPA team lead within BOEM's Office of Renewable Energy Programs. And today I'm going to be discussing the National Environmental Policy Act review process that we're just entering now. I think Will gave a great kind of lead into this. So everything that's gone on before and the submission of a construction operation plan is now leading into the environmental review for that construction operation plan. So in other words, for the actual proposal that has been submitted by Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind. Next slide. So kind of going back and showing our entire leasing and development process and showing where we are today. And you can see in the kind of outline in orange, you have the "We Are Here," which is the beginning of our BOEM environmental and technical review process. So a lot has happened already, but we're just at the beginning of the review for the construction and operations plan. Next slide. So Will covered some of this, but just some reminders. The construction and operations plan for the Kitty Hawk project was initially submitted in December of 2020. We did a review of that to determine if the information was sufficient. And we submitted comments back to the developer, and we got a revised construction operation plan in June of 2021. And we submitted more comments back, and we got another version in July of 2021. And that's the current version. And again, it's available on our website. And just reiterating that what BOEM will do will either approve, disapprove, or approve with modifications that construction and operation plan. And that'll occur after the environmental impact statement is complete, and it'll be documented by a record of decision. Next slide. So the National Environmental Policy Act, you've probably heard this, this law talked about before. It's often called NEPA for shorthand. I just like to point out it's not the National Environmental Protection Act. It's a procedural law requiring federal agencies to assess environmental effects of proposed actions and reasonable alternatives prior to making a decision. When NEPA was crafted, Congress, understood that the federal government would have impacts on the environment, but it was very important for decision makers to understand those impacts and to assess alternatives to potentially reduce impacts to the environment and to people. So the NEPA process, it's often referred to as an environmental review, but it looks at things beyond what you think of as just a typical environment. It's considered the human environment, so we look at socioeconomic impacts as well. And there are some major decision and action points for where we do our NEPA reviews. One is lease issuance, as Will described, and another, and where we are today, is plan approval. So for site assessment plans for things like the installation of a meteorological tower or a buoy, or the construction and operation of a wind energy facility, or a general activities plan if there was something like a cable proposed. And then again, NEPA would be required for any decommissioning activities. Next slide. So the environmental review process for a COP, it's about a 2-year process. It begins with the COP submittal, and we conduct our completeness and sufficiency review. And then it really gets kicked off, that 2-year timeline, with the publication of a notice of intent in the Federal Register. And for this project, that occurred on July 30th. And that initiated a 30-day public comment period, which we're in right now, and holding public scoping meetings, which this is the first of. And we're really looking to receive input on issues that we should look at in the document, as well as alternatives. After we complete our scoping, we'll begin drafting a draft environmental impact statement. We prepare this with the assistance of cooperating federal agencies and cooperating state agencies, and oftentimes cooperating tribal governments as well. Once a document has been completed, we publish a notice of availability in the Federal Register, and there is a 45-day public comment period. And very importantly, we'll be holding additional public meetings called public hearings. So hopefully in that time frame, COVID will have gone down to a level where we can do that in person. But we may still implement virtual meetings to provide more access as well. And then after the comment period closes, we start working on a final environmental impact statement. And within that document, we address public comments with the assistance of cooperating agencies. And we publish a notice of availability in the Federal Register for that document as well. The final step in the process is the issuance of a record of decision, which documents our decision on the project, whether to approve with modifications, or disapprove, and what alternative is selected. And there's a minimum of a 30-day waiting period after the publication of the final EIS to when we issue the record of decision. Next slide. So going back to the beginning of the process, the notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. What is that? Well, it's a document that's published in the Federal Register, and this occurred on July 30th, 2021. And there's a link there for how you can actually get to look at that document. And it's docket number BOEM-2021-0050. And really it just begins and initiates the environmental impact statement process. And again, initiating a 30-day public comment period, which ends on August 30th, 2021. Next slide. So public comments on the NOI. I think if you take one thing away from this meeting, it would be the information on this slide. Public comments are extremely important element of the NEPA process. Local expertise and perspective really help guide our environmental analysis. And if we get very good information from the people who live in the area, it creates better informed decisions. And that's really at the heart of NEPA, informed decision-making and public participation. So the type of information we're looking for, you can submit anything to us, but what's the most helpful in developing our document and creating informed decisions is information on significant issues to be analyzed in the environmental impact statement, sources of information that we should be looking at and to include in our environmental impact statement and to form the basis of our analysis, as well as any data gaps or information needs that may be out there. And finally, but certainly not least, is reasonable alternatives. Are there any other ways that this project could occur that meets the purpose and need of the project, but may do so in a way that would reduce environmental impacts. Next slide. So virtual public scoping meetings, tonight's the first meeting, but we have another one on Thursday at 1 p.m. and then another one next Tuesday, August 17th at 5:30 p.m. And the virtual meeting room, and that link is now being posted in the chat, is a great resource. And it includes a lot of great information on the meeting, includes project posters. It'll include all the presentations you've seen today, as well as information on how to comment. So you can simply go to that link and then you'll be able to find the way to comment, as well as register for upcoming meetings. Next slide. A little bit more about the meeting posters. I really encourage everyone to go and take a look at these. They provide a lot of great information. I won't talk about all of them, but they range anywhere from poster on how to comment and the kind of information we're looking for, to some of our fact sheets on electromagnetic fields and marine life, some of our fact sheets about underwater noise, as well as some project-specific things like the project design envelope being implemented for this project, information on commercial fisheries and the kind of activities that occur in that arena near the project area, information on how we do the National Historic Preservation Act. So a lot of very important information, and that is very helpful to the public, can be found in these posters. And the link is in the chat and on this slide as well. Next slide, please. So how to comment. You do not have to go online to comment. That is our preferred method. However, there are other ways to do it. You can comment at this meeting. If you raise your hand in the Zoom meeting during our listening session, you'll be able to comment, and that comment will be an official log comment that we will load onto regulations.gov for our consideration. In addition, you can mail comments in an envelope titled Kitty Hawk Cop EIS to the email address right there. We'll accept those as well. The easiest way to do it, though, is just to go online to www.regulations.gov, enter in the docket number, which is BOEM-2021-0050, click search, and then use the comment button. Next slide. So I've said EIS, or Environmental Impact Statement, a number of times already today, but what is an EIS? It presents a proposed federal action's impact analysis on the environment. So it has a few elements. One of them is a proposed action, a term you may see a lot, and that's the action being analyzed in the document, as well as alternatives, reasonable alternatives that could minimize, reduce, or eliminate impacts. At a minimum, we have to have a proposed action and a no action alternative, but we try to do more than that. In addition, we look at effects in the document. These are both beneficial and adverse effects. The affected environment description includes reasonably foreseeable environmental trends and plans actions other than the project. You may have heard of this described as cumulative impacts in the past. So we essentially do the same thing, but just call it something different. Next slide. So I mentioned this earlier. When you hear environment, you might think of things like marine mammals and sea turtles and benthic resources. And we certainly look at that in the document, but we also look at socioeconomic impacts. So visual resources, tourism and recreation, commercial and recreational fishing, all of these are elements that we look at in the environmental impact statement. Next slide. And so how we conduct an environmental review of a construction and operations plan is we look at what's called a project design envelope. And that allows the developer to submit kind of a range of activities that they might do. So there may be up to a certain height of a turbine, up to a certain amount of turbines. And it helps kind of future-proof our document. So if you're going along and it avoids having to pause or restarting the environmental review due to project changes, but it doesn't change the kind of extent of our review, because we always look at the maximum impacting parameters for each resource. And another plus of utilizing this project design envelope is it reduces or eliminates the need for subsequent environmental reviews as the project is revised or refined after approval. And if However, if additional environmental review or consultations would be required if there were revisions that were made outside of what's in the project design envelope. Next slide. So while we're doing our environmental impact statement, there are also several consultations that we have to conduct for various resources, including Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation Act, which deals with central fish habitat, as well as the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Coastal Zone Management Act. Next slide. So for our National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 review, we're implementing something called the NEPA substitution process. And we're implementing it as a reflection of stakeholder needs for our process. As we've kind of learned as we've done these reviews in the past, what really the stakeholder needs, and this process aligns a lot better with that. So it's an efficient and streamlined approach to better integrate the National Historic Preservation Act into the National Environmental Policy Act. There are clear expectations for the environmental review time and mitigation costs. And there's earlier and more direct input into alternatives and mitigation measures selection for consulting parties and stakeholders. And for tribal governments, there's a greater focus on government to government consultation. Next slide. And this just is a slide that shows how the National Historic Preservation Act process fits into the NEPA process. And the National Historic Preservation Act processes are in blue in this slide. Next slide. So how we use the NEPA process for the National Historic Preservation Act review. Throughout this process, BOEM is, we're seeking comments and input regarding the identification of historic properties and/or potential effects to historic properties from activities associated with the approval of the Kitty Hawk Construction and Operations Plan, as well as reasonable alternatives, size, geographic, or other restrictions on construction and siting of facilities and activities. And last but not least, potential mitigation measures to be analyzed in the environmental impact statement, including ways to avoid, minimize, or otherwise treat and resolve adverse effects on historic properties. Next slide. So the EIS schedule. In early fall of 2020, we're scheduled to publish the draft environmental impact statement, which would initiate a 45-day public comment period. And then in the summer of 2023, we'd publish the final environmental impact statement. And then in late summer of 2023, we would conclude our consultations and publish a record of decision. Next slide. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention a program that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has called our Environmental Studies Program. It does rigorous scientific research, and it informs the decision-making process and fills data gaps. And I've highlighted a few studies here that I think are relevant to this project, and there's many more that deal with North Carolina and deal with offshore wind in general. But just highlighting a few, a study on EMF impacts, another study dealing with actually looking at a power cable in the environment and just observing what happens around it. And a study I always like to highlight is a real-time opportunity for development environmental observations, or RODEO for short, much easier just to say RODEO. And basically what that does is it collects data and allows us to learn from some of the offshore wind facilities that have just recently been installed in the United States, including the Block Island project in Rhode Island and the project off of coastal Virginia. And we have other studies that deal with potential impacts to recreation and tourism, and a study we did in this actual area of the Kitty Hawk wind energy area, an archaeological survey. And all the studies can be found on our website, and I believe the link was sent in the chat. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation today, but if you have any follow-on questions after the meeting, my email address and phone number are there, so feel free to give me an email or a call. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bryan. Our final presenter is Bryan Benito with Avangrid. Bryan?
Thanks, Pam. Good evening, everybody. My name is Bryan Benito. I'm the lead permitting manager for the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project. I'd like to thank you for your attendance today. Next slide, please. So my goal is to introduce my company and the project to you all. Bryan and Will gave a really great overview of where we've come through the federal process. And my goal here is to introduce the project, the company, and where we're looking to go as a project team. Next slide, please. So Avangrid Renewables, it may not be a household name for you all, but we have a very well-established presence here in the States. We're the third largest renewable energy developer in the States. And as this slide shows, we operate in over 24 states, including North Carolina. We have over 8 gigawatts or 8,000 megawatts of wind and solar in operation. So we build and develop, construct, and own our facilities. Avangrid is headquartered in Connecticut and it's traded on the New York Stock Exchange under AGR. Next slide, please. We're here to talk about offshore. So as we all know, offshore is a nascent industry, and Kitty Hawk is part of, and Avangrid Renewables is part of the Iberdrola company. Iberdrola is one of the world's largest offshore wind developers. So we have a really unique ability here at Kitty Hawk to merge our onshore renewable development experience and local knowledge with that of a global enterprise that's been doing this quite successfully in Europe and elsewhere throughout the world. Kitty Hawk represents our wholly owned 100% wind energy area. As Will had mentioned, we procured that and won that through the competitive auction in 2018. Offshore Renewables is also an owner in the joint venture development projects up off the coast of Massachusetts that many of you may be aware of. Next slide, please. So this little video here is meant to just give you a little introduction on who Kitty Hawk project is.
I'm proud to work in offshore wind. It's a rapidly growing industry, and it's bringing thousands of jobs to coastal communities. North Carolina and Virginia are home to some of the most powerful offshore wind resources in the country. And here at Kitty Hawk, we're working closely with the military and with the fishing and shipping industries to develop wind power in a safe and responsible way. We're proud that our work will have lasting benefits for generations to come.
So what are Kitty Hawk offshore wind projects goals? So first and foremost, we're looking to deliver safe, sustainable, and domestic energy through the use of our wind turbine generators off on the outer continental shelf within our lease area. This project will help contribute to the Biden administration's goal of having 30 gigawatts or 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030. We're looking also, as we're shown off the coast of North Carolina, but we're looking to contribute to the Virginia Clean Economy Act. The Clean Economy Act mandates that the Commonwealth of Virginia procure over 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2034. And we're well positioned to help with that. We're also looking to develop efficiently and responsibly construct and operate this project. As Will mentioned, we're very well sited and are fortunate to have a really thoughtful and thorough process of where our wind energy area is. And now Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind needs to pick that up and continue to survey and develop and ultimately construct and operate this in a responsible manner to provide that long-term renewable energy to the Commonwealth. And then we're looking to maximize the wind energy capacity within our lease area. So ultimately, the purpose and need of our project is to deliver domestic renewable energy from up to 69 wind turbine generators to Virginia, where it will be interconnected into the PJM managed high voltage electrical grid and make a substantial contribution to the regional electrical reliability and energy security. Next slide, please. So as we've seen in some previous slides, our wind energy area is approximately 27 miles due east of Corolla, North Carolina. You can see in this bottom left figure here that our wind energy area is outlined in black. That represents the 122,000 plus acres of our lease, our wind energy area. And what we've put forward in our construction operations plan is a plan to develop approximately 60% of that wind energy area, which we call the wind development area. The wind development area will have that up to 69 wind turbine generators out there, and 1 offshore substation or electrical service platform. As proposed in our construction operations plan, we'll be putting in 2 co-located subsea cables. Those cables will be along the export cable corridor outlined here in light purple, and that will make a landfall, or propose to make a landfall, in Sandbridge Beach in Virginia Beach, Virginia. On the top right figure here, you can see down in the bottom right in yellow, that's the established and pre-existing parking lot that we are proposing to horizontally directionally drill from out into the ocean to allow that interconnection of the export cable corridor, the export cable, to connect with the onshore cable outlined here in red. That route along the onshore cable is going to the top left of the screen there, which is a corporate landing business park where we have an option to purchase up to 30 acres of that area for our substation. It's important to note that this entire onshore transmission route is along existing rights of way, and it's along land that's owned by Virginia Beach, Virginia. Next slide, please. So as Bryan had mentioned, we've put forward in our construction operations plan, or our COP, a project design envelope. This is really the most effective way for us as a developer to allow BOEM to review the project while still maintaining flexibility for the rapidly changing technology that we're seeing in the offshore wind energy area. As Will had mentioned, not many years ago, 8 megawatts was considered the largest turbine that a developer would put in the OCS. And now we're currently seeing turbines from 12 to over 14 megawatts. Having this project design envelope will allow BOEM and the cooperating agencies to review the maximum impact associated with those 69 foundations, and as well as allowing us, developer, to source through our supply chain the most appropriate technologies for our ultimate project. So as you can see here on this slide, the wind development area, as I mentioned, is about 50,000 acres of the total 122,000 acres. We've got a rotor diameter of 285 meters and a upper tip limit of upwards of 317 meters. So that represents the top of the turbine blade to the surface of the ocean. We've proposed monopiles and 4-legged jackets as our base case in the construction operations plan, but we've also left open the opportunity to install up to 3 suction caisson foundations. The largest potential footprint, which would include the scour protection for all the locations, is over 225,000 square meters. And that consists of the 67 monopiles and those 3 suction caissons. So that's the maximum impact that we're proposing for this project, and that BOEM and the cooperating agencies will be assessing and reviewing under NEPA. Our offshore electrical service platform, or ESP, as I mentioned, will be out in the wind energy area, and it will transmit the power that's collected from the up to 69 units at that substation offshore, and it will push that energy via 2 co-located high voltage alternating current cables. These cables will be buried within that export cable corridor with a target burial depth of up to 2.5 meters below stable seabed. And as I showed on the previous slide, our onshore transmission route is up to 5.7 miles long, and it's all along existing rights of way within the streets or rights of way of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Next slide, please. This slide here just shows you representative figures of the foundation types that we've put forward in our construction operations plan. So as I mentioned, monopile is our primary foundation put forward in the construction operations plan, but we have left open a pile jacket and a suction caisson. Next slide, please. So the project design envelope, as I was mentioning, is outlined here with our wind turbine generators. So this graphic here on the bottom right represents the maximum dimensions that we would see, or that the public would see out within our wind development area. So as I mentioned, that has a tip to mean sea level height of 317 meters. On the left, within that wind development area shaded in light pink, is our layout. Our layout is proposed to be a northeast, south, southwest axis. And this really is consistent with the predominant and historical trawl tow directionality in that area. So our fishery liaison officers really been working quite diligently, talking to the commercial fleet as well as the recreational fleet out there. And that feedback has really helped form this proposed layout that we're seeing here. Our turbines will be spaced approximately 1/8 of a nautical mile, or 1.5 kilometers apart. Next slide, please. So this slide represents our proposed construction schedule. This is in line with the construction operations plan that we put forward and the timeline that we're working on right now. So as you can see here, pending approval of the COP or pending approval of the COP with modifications, we're proposing to begin construction in Q1 of 2024. Typically, we start onshore, and that work is about a year long, and then we begin working offshore in the export cable corridor. Once we've completed installing the export cable corridor cables, we begin working on our ESP, and then ultimately begin working on installing those foundations, with final touch being the installation of the nacelles and the blades. So the actual wind turbine that generates the electricity. As you can see here, from start to finish is a little over 2.5 years of construction. We have a commercial operation date, or a COD, proposed to be in late 2026. Next slide, please. So this slide here shows our federal permitting schedule. We are a Fast 41 project, so that means that we're covered. We're a covered project and available for review on the permitting dashboard. And on that permitting dashboard, you'll see these dates outlined right here. These dates were agreed upon by the cooperating agencies in BOEM, and as such, they're put up on the dashboard for all to be for all of us, for the public, for the developers, for the federal agencies, to be able to have some accountability to this schedule and to be able to track where we are and where we're going with this project approval. So you can see basically, the dates on the left here. I don't want to go through them all, but the permitting dashboard is a good resource for folks to find out a little bit more about the specific schedule and the steps that are taken to get there. And Rebecca just placed that in the chat for your consumption. Next slide, please. So that's really my presentation. We have a lot of information up on kittyhawkoffshore.com, including real-time buoy data. So we deployed a floating buoy last year, and we're providing that information in real time to the public. We're getting a lot of positive feedback from the commercial and recreational fishing community and others on that data. As I mentioned, my name is Bryan Benito, and my email address is on this slide, as well as my project team's email addresses. With that, I look forward to working with BOEM and the cooperating agencies. And on behalf of Avant-Garde Renewables, look forward to hearing the comments and feedback associated with our proposed project. Thank you, Pam.
Great. Thanks so much, Bryan. And thank you to all of our presenters. So in just a minute, we're going to take a quick break to let folks stretch before we start the formal public comments. As a reminder, please feel free to continue to type any questions that you would like to have clarified into that Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then following the public comments, we'll have time for the BOEM representatives to respond to your questions. As a note, we will stop taking new clarifying questions at the close of the public comment portion of today's meeting. And I'd note that any questions submitted to that Q&A are not considered formal scoping comments for the NEPA process. So if you wish to make a formal comment, please either plan to speak today or to submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail. So at this point, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Thank you. Thank you all. I think we're ready to get started with the public comment portion for today's meeting. So as a reminder, I will call on the people who registered to make a comment when they signed up for the meeting. All names will be called in the order in which we received your registration. And then after all those folks have commented, I'll ask if there's anyone else who would like to make a comment. You would then use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom platform. Or if you're calling in from a phone, you would type *9. And I'll call on people to comment in the order in which they raise their hand. So during the comment period, I'll post the names of the next 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn's coming. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on the screen that will allow you to unmute yourself to make your comment. And sometimes that pop-up box gets hidden if you have several windows open on your computer. So I'd recommend closing any extra open windows now. And then if you're calling in from a phone, you'll hear a prompt to press *6 to unmute your line. I'd also remind you that if you have any clarifying questions, you can still type those into the question and answer box on your Zoom platform. We will stop taking new questions once we're finished with the public comment period. So be sure to submit any questions that you have as soon as you're able. Please note that when we receive your questions and the team begins to work on an answer, within that question and answer box, we'll move your question to something called the dismissed category. And then once we're ready, we'll read both your question and provide an answer aloud. So just a couple of quick ground rules for us to follow during the comment period today. The first is to please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. And I'll post a timer on the screen to help keep track of time. At the end of your time, I'll jump in to ask you to quickly wrap up to allow others the opportunity to comment. If you're not able to complete your comments within the allotted time, you can still submit them in writing before the end of the public scoping period, which ends on August 30th, 2021. Second, please be respectful towards everyone who provides comments during today's meeting. You each have a unique and a valued perspective, and no one comment's considered more important than another. So comments that are directed to or are about another commenter are not in line with the intent of today's meeting, and they will not be allowed. Should any comments or actions distract from the purpose of today's scoping meeting, that speaker may be placed on mute or removed from the online platform. And finally, I apologize in advance for mispronouncing anyone's name. So the names of the next 5 commenters are about to be posted in the comment box. I'll read your names and I'd ask you to please use the raise your hand feature to indicate that you're here and you wish to make a comment. Corey Hibbets, Jim Kendall, Michael Bryant, and Skip Feller. Great, thank you. Our first commenter will be Skip Feller.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Yeah, how you doing? My name is Skip Feller. I operate a fleet of head boats and the Virginia Beach Fishing Center up here in Rudy Inlet. And I just wanted to mainly comment that Rick Robbins has done a great job engaging the recreational fishermen and everything with the survey boats for the Kitty Hawk project. He's kept everybody well informed of the boats, and I know all the fishermen here and in the Carolina have worked well together with them. And also, the question I had was about AIS. Of course, we have 2 test turbines up here, and they were supposed to have AIS on them, and they still don't. And I do think that that's an important factor. You know, as the project goes on, I don't think you need it on all of them, but especially like the 2 sitting out here, I think they should have it. And then as far as the recreational fishermen go, I can tell you from the 2 test turbines we have up here, the fishing around them is great. I know while they were building them, you know, they have a security zone around them and you can't get near them. But once they're built, once they're there, you can fish around them. They're great resources for all kinds of fish. There's sea bass around them, triggerfish. There's cobia around them. It's not just bottom fish. We've had some mahi in here around them several times this summer and last summer. So all in all, I think it's a great project, and you know, just make sure you keep the fishermen engaged, and I think it'll be a great thing in the long run.
Great, thank you for your comment. Just want to see if anyone else that had pre-registered is interested in making a comment. So Corey Hibbets, Jim Kendall, or Michael Bryant. If you're on, if you could please raise your hand. Great. Thank you, Michael. You'll be our next speaker.
Thank you. My name is Michael Bryan. I'm from Manteo, North Carolina. And as a member of the National Audubon Society and as a advisory board member for the North Carolina State Office, I support the need for responsible siting of and operating of the offshore wind energy to achieve our clean energy goals in North Carolina and protect the places that birds need now and in the future. I ask that BOEM fulfill its responsibility to protect migratory birds by supporting regional monitoring and adaptive management programs and requiring Avangrid to adopt practices to reduce bird collisions with turbines at the Kitty Hawk Wind Project. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comment. And again, we'll call the last couple of names here, Corey Hibbets and Jim Kendall. If you're on and you wish to make a comment, if you could please raise your hand. Okay, so those are all of the folks who had pre-registered to make a comment today. If you did not pre-register but would still like to make a comment, I'd ask that you please use the raise your hand button on your Zoom platform, or if you called in, if you could dial *9. And then I'll call your names in the order in which you raised your hand. And at that point, you would receive a pop-up box asking you to unmute. So if there's anyone who did not pre-register but is still interested in making a comment, if you could please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Or if you dialed in, you can press *9. Okay, at this point, I don't see any additional hands raised to provide public scoping comments. So as we've discussed previously, you can also submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail by August 30th of 2021. At this point, we're going to run through a couple of slides just to give some additional information about submitting comments on the NOI. Once we've gone through that quick couple-minute presentation, we'll move on to the question and answer portion of today's meeting. So I want to walk you through the process to provide written comments on the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project Notice of Intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. The comments can be provided orally during future scoping meetings, electronically through regulations.gov, or in written form by mail. So please note that comments on the Notice of Intent should be submitted no later than August 30th, 2021. All comments submitted will be made part of the public record and will be posted publicly. First, I want to walk you through how you can provide comments on the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Notice of Intent electronically through the regulations.gov website. So you would go to regulations.gov in your browser, type the relevant docket number. In this case, it's BOEM-2021-0050. You'll type that into the search bar and then press the search button. The search result returns the Notice of Intent for the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind. To view the full Notice of Intent text, you're going to click the underlined notice title. To submit a comment, you would then press the comment button. From there, you can type the text of your comment in the space provided or attach files as needed. So further down the comment submission page, you would select if you're providing this comment as an individual or on behalf of an organization, and you'd provide your name and address in the fields below. Please note that BOEM does not consider comments submitted anonymously. Once your entry is complete, you would then complete the CAPTCHA and press the Submit Comment button. Comments can also be submitted by mail with envelopes labeled Kitty Hawk, COP or COP, EIS, and addressed to the Program Manager, Office of Renewable Energy, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, 45600 Woodland Road, Sterling, Virginia, 20166. Comments must be received or postmarked no later than August 30th, 2021. BOEM does not consider anonymous comments, so please include your name and your address as part of your submittal. So at this point, we will go ahead and move into our question and answer portion. And I think at this point, we had one question that had been submitted. See if we can pull that up for you. Okay, it looks like we actually did not have any questions that were submitted today. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation today. And what I'd like to do now is to call up Michelle Morin to give a few closing remarks for us.
Thank you, Pam. And again, my name is Michelle Morin, and I'm the chief of BOEM's Environment Branch for Renewable Energy. And I want to thank the ICF and BOEM staff for holding, I think, a successful first of our 3 public scoping meetings for the Kitty Hawk EIS. Thank you, Pam, for facilitating, and Bryan and Will from BOEM, and Bryan from Kitty Hawk for your presentations. I think we had a pretty good turnout. It hovered in the 40s. So I'm interested to see, the next few meetings, what our turnout is. So thank you all that you spent the last couple of hours of your evening with us. We really value the comments received. Hopefully you thought this was a good format to share your thoughts and learn more about the project and the process. As Bryan Crever said earlier in the meeting, we will be publishing the draft EIS for comment in early fall of 2022, about a year from now. I think we all share the same goal, is to have the best informed decision regarding this project. So your input and feedback is really important throughout this EIS process. So if you have additional scoping comments, I really encourage you to submit those by the deadline of August 30th. And again, thank you very much for giving us your last couple of hours this evening. We really appreciate your time and your input. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you all for participating in today's virtual public scoping meeting. We appreciate your input and your involvement in this process. A recording of this meeting will be made available in the coming week on the project website. For additional information, please visit the virtual meeting room website. This meeting's adjourned.